The Inside Out movies have some of the most interesting portrayals of complex topics that I've ever seen, especially in a film aimed for children. The first one is one of my favorite animated movies of all time, so I was ecstatic when I found out that there would be a second one, focusing on an older Riley dealing with the complexities of adolescence. The sequel introduces new emotions in the form of colorful characters, led by Anxiety, who challenges Joy in a rivalry that I thought was extremely accurate to the human experience. In this video, I want to analyze the themes in the second Inside Out, focusing on the new concepts introduced, as well as the conflict within Riley. As anyone who has ever gone through the tumultuous period of adolescence can attest, it is full of complexity, moments of self-doubt, and lessons that one has to navigate on their own, as there are problems in life that nobody can teach you, except raw experience. First, let's focus on the plot of Inside Out 2, and I have to say that this video will contain spoilers, as I will talk about important plot elements. It takes place a year after the events of the first film, as we are introduced to an older Riley, who is going through a new array of problems as she grows up. This is also shown throughout the changes happening in her brain. For example, when the emotions try to manipulate the console that controls her mind, it is much more sensitive, representing how when you reach a certain age, your emotions get stronger, your sense of identity changes rapidly, as we will see soon, and a cocktail of hormones make you take rash decisions, such as lashing out.
I'm too gross to go anywhere ever again!
I would have loved to see this movie deal with the topic of teenage angst, as that is something that I personally went through in my adolescent years. I remember there was a time when I was 15 or so when I felt my conscience get a little upgrade. I became a little bit like Riley in terms of goal seeking, but also with a higher sense of artistic appreciation, and that's the way I looked at life, and that is something I felt like the movie should have focused a little bit more with the premise that it focuses on Riley's adolescence. I also felt much stronger feelings of impulsivity, anger, sadness, but also emotions such as joy, and things that made me want to appreciate life more. I felt a strong drive to do things, as well as getting involved politically in topics that I barely understood, and I feel like that's just the way that being a teenager makes you feel, and I think it's very important to focus on this, but also I love the way that the movie portrays some other topics like the sense of self, which we're gonna see soon. As the primary focus of the movie is how Riley works hard in order to reach her goal, in this case being good at hockey so she can get into the team. One of the most important plot elements introduced in Inside Out 2 is the idea of a sense of self, something portrayed as a small tree in the middle of Riley's mind, tied to her belief system, which is represented by a beautiful lake. In the beginning of the movie, we see how Riley's beliefs are positive and constructive. This shows how in the years since the first movie, she has learned a lot from her experiences, and starts to gain confidence in her own tastes, experiences, and things that make Riley, well, Riley. The sense of self tree also represents her value system, or sense of right and wrong, something that starts eroding when she starts making decisions that contradict herself, from ignoring her friends to pretending to dislike the band she loves to impress the other girls. Personally, I thought that the examples that the movie portrayed were cute and family-friendly in comparison with the many ways that a person can betray their sense of self as they grow up, leading to serious consequences, impaired judgment, and loss of self-esteem. This could be represented by the new orange tree that Anxiety creates near the end of the movie, which only utters, "I am not good enough." The final metaphor for the sense of self is that when Riley regains it, it shows every one of the colors tied to her different emotions, showing how our sense of self in real life is often complex, and not always filled with positive feelings. We feel angry at injustice. Sadness reminds us of the importance of what we lose, and fear inspires us to act and protect ourselves. Anxiety helps us plan ahead within reason, and our joy makes us bask in beautiful experiences that remind us what is worth living for. Other ideas and Easter eggs that I enjoyed in Inside Out 2 include the idea of having different characters living inside your mind, such as Bluffy and Lance, who I thought were hilarious. It made me think about what characters from my childhood and adolescence would be hiding inside my own mind. The metaphor for bottling up your main emotions when you reach a certain age, something I highly identified with. And finally, the idea in the beginning of the movie, where Joy sends negative emotions into the back of Riley's mind until they all come flooding back in the end. I felt that this metaphor was on point, especially since at the beginning of Riley's changes, even her emotions, our main characters, act naive in terms of understanding Riley's mind. This is why Joy decides that this method of getting rid of bad emotions is effective, when really it is not. In a sense, this metaphor works intentionally or unintentionally in favor of the movie, as Riley's emotions work in tandem with her. As a final argument to my point, we see how in the minds of her parents, their workspace is organized and more formal, and the emotions act more in control. This contrasts to Riley's mind and other young characters such as Bree and Jordan, who appeared in Riley's first date in 2015, whose minds are messy and more strangely decorated. This represents how as we age and mature, we become more in control of our emotions. Now, I want to focus on the movie's most important character. In the first Inside Out, the dynamic between joy and sadness led to many discussions about the role that seemingly negative feelings have in the psychology of a person. In Inside Out 2, this changes when anxiety shows up with the other emotions. Before I discuss her character, I want to mention how I really hope to see more of the other new characters, because I felt like in the movie the roles got sidelined a little bit, such as like Envy, which is kind of like a comedic relief character, and Embarrassment too, who has kind of a bigger role but not enough to justify like the introduction of these new characters. But anyways, let's go back to Anxiety. In Inside Out 2, the dynamic between joy and anxiety has a very important purpose. Anxiety taking control of Riley's mind has much deeper implications than the obvious metaphor Pixar tried to portray. For one, we have the idea of Riley bottling up her strongest emotions, seemingly temporary in a single pursuit, in this case hockey. This is something that many people who are determined in a single goal will relate to, but with the cost that if anxiety takes too much control, it can have disastrous consequences for our mental health. Anxiety herself became a much more important and detailed character than I ever expected for the movie's previews. Like Joy, she is a natural leader, but with a much harsher way of doing things. From the beginning, she tries to take absolute control of the situation by any means necessary. She believes that she knows what is best for Riley, and fears being contradicted. Of course, this state of affairs ends up being bad for every single character, culminating in a panic attack when Riley's whole negative emotions come crashing back towards the end of the movie. However, does this mean that anxiety is an evil character? Should we all aim to get rid of this emotion as much as possible? My answer is no. The message of this movie is that we should not hate anxiety, but instead try to find the most effective way to work with this emotion. We even see this in Riley's parents, who also have these orange guys, but in a much more controlled form. After all, having an alarm in your head that alerts you whenever it senses danger helps us avoid threats within reason. According to evolutionary psychology, we are primed to feel anxious as our ancestors had to assume the worst from a situation. If you heard a noise at night, assuming it is a predator such as a wolf, you also have a much higher chance of survival than assuming it is just the wind every single time. But in our modern world, these fears come in the form of much more complex emotions that sometimes take years to figure out. Anxiety can be a useful tool, but only when we know how to control it. That is why at the end we see her in a much more relaxed form, having her space to relax when things get too intense. For me, Inside Out 2 is a movie that I really identified with, even much more than the first one. I love the way that the first one tackled depression in a way that hasn't been done before in many movies, but this one deals with much more complex topics. It's a little bit more relatable in that regard, and I feel like we as an audience grew up with Riley, and it would be very interesting to see like a third movie where she is an adult and she has to deal with even more complex emotions. But I also feel like that would be a gigantic challenge for Pixar, but it would still be worth doing as they have proven that they can deal with complex topics such as in the movie Soul, which also led to topics related to purpose and the fear of death, and themes that many adults can relate to, so I think it would be a great idea for Pixar. Going back to my younger years, I faced a lot of the problems Riley faced, letting my anxiety control most of my choices. The only thing that I found bizarre was the way the movie's conflict resolves within a weekend, when in real life it is a process that takes many years. The way that I felt my sense of self changed from when I was around 15 to the present when I am now 24 has been a constant back and forth. Situations of extreme adversity have influenced my decision making, as well as moments of low self-esteem, lack of direction in life, etc. But at the same time, I have felt my belief systems get influenced by more positive emotions, such as basking in the awesomeness of nature, or rediscovering my love for things like music and making videos for you guys, after a long period of doubting myself. One of the most emotional moments in the movie comes at the end. This is when the new sense of self is completed, with the unexpected consequence of Riley believing that she won't be good enough to reach her goals. This lack of confidence, fueled by insecurity, is one of the strongest obstacles one can overcome throughout their lives. I cried at this scene in the theater, because I remembered that 16-year-old me, who began facing much more complex challenges in life, such as trying to find love, acceptance, and his place in the world. This can happen in many ways, such as trying to get into your school's hockey team, but also in things such as making friends, living up to your family's expectations, or even learning to love yourself. In many ways, I saw my old self in Riley. But after countless obstacles, finding a new sense of purpose, I realized that everything turns out fine in the end. Sometimes, I wish I could go back and give myself a hug, and tell myself that everything would be okay in the end. One of the most effective tools I have encountered over the years is meditation, which has helped me understand my mind better, as well as reading about philosophies such as Stoicism and Existentialism in order to form my own philosophy, which I take to heart. By following a set of principles that I stick to, and understanding how my own mind works, I can do anything. And this in a way represents the tree in Riley's mind, the sense of self that we all have to cultivate and make sure it aligns with our own values. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see each other in the next time. Have a great day.